We often look at adults and think about how complex we are, but, you know, have you ever really considered those first few months of life? How incredibly fast everything changes.
It's an amazing transformation, isn't it? Going from, well, basically a bundle of reflexes to someone with feelings and thoughts.
Exactly. And today we're actually diving into a really remarkable early look at just that. It's called A Biographical Sketch of an Infant.
Ah, the Darwin piece.
That's the one. Charles Darwin, published way back in July 1877 in the journal Mind.
It's incredible, Darwin, famous for evolution, applying that same intense observation to his own baby. A really unique perspective.
Totally. So our plan is to kind of pull out some of the key things he noticed back then, some of those initial understandings of how a baby's mind starts working.
Sounds good. It really did lay some groundwork, even if informally, for developmental psychology. So where should we start, those very first days?
Yeah, let's begin there. The absolute basics. He talks about those reflexes we all sort of recognize, right? Sneezing, hiccuping, yawning.
The involuntary stuff. Stretching, even screaming. But he was already looking deeper.
How so?
Well, take his note from around the 7th day. He touched the baby's foot, the sole specifically, and the toes curled up.
Okay, a reflex.
Yes, but Darwin's point was that this wasn't likely conscious. It wasn't about the muscles being ready or the brain coordinating it deliberately. It suggested something more inherent, pre-programmed almost.
Like the basic operating system loading up.
Yeah.
Okay, then he gets into the senses. Sound, for instance. He noticed the baby didn't react much to sounds in the first couple of weeks.
That's right. Seemed indifferent. But then later on, a loud noise would make the baby startle. And he specifically mentioned day 66, I think?
Yeah, 66 days. He said even a slight noise could make the baby frown and cry then. What's going on there?
It really highlights how our senses develop gradually. The auditory system, the brain parts processing sound, they're just not fully online at birth.
Oh, okay. So it's not ignoring. It's just the wiring isn't complete yet.
Precisely. And you see a similar thing with vision. He described the eyes as sort of fixed, not really focusing, until around day 45.
Day 45. What happened then?
That's when a bright-colored tassel caught the baby's attention, and even then, the ability to actually follow objects with the eyes developed bit by bit. It wasn't instant.
And what about movement? Those little waving arms and legs? Darwin called them vague and purposeless at first.
He did, and he noted it took until about 40 days before the baby could reliably get a hand to its mouth.
That seems like a pretty big step.
Oh, absolutely. It shows that motor control, that coordination, takes time to develop. It starts kind of random and slowly becomes more directed. And getting the hand to the mouth, that's huge for self-soothing, for exploring.
Right, through taste and touch. Okay, so that's the physical side. But Darwin was also tracking emotions, wasn't he? Even really early on.
Yes, he was. He mentioned signs of anger around day 8.
Day 8. Wow. What did that look like?
Pretty much what you'd expect, a crying fit, red, wrinkled face, often triggered by basic discomforts, like being cold or hungry.
So basic survival signals, essentially.
Likely, yes. Suggests a biological basis for these core emotions. What's interesting, though, is he noted fear seemed to show up later than anger.
Oh. What triggered fear then?
Initially, it was often sudden sounds. This timing difference is kind of intriguing. It hints that different emotions might develop on slightly different schedules, maybe linked to brain maturation or understanding.
He even mentioned later fears, right? Like strangers or big animals, but much later on.
Yeah, around 2 years old or so. A different kind of fear developing then. But back in infancy, he also saw the beginnings of pleasure around that 45-day mark again.
Linked to what?
Sucking, warmth, those really fundamental comforts.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the social stuff started appearing. Affection.
He observed early signs towards the nurse around 4 months old, and then a more distinct affection for his father, Darwin himself, presumably around 6 months.
It's pretty amazing he was charting the growth of relationships like that.
It really shows that move from just seeking general comfort to forming specific bonds. That's a huge part of development. He even thought he saw jealousy around 5 months.
Jealousy. How?
The nurse was holding a doll, apparently, and the baby reacted. Suggests a surprisingly early grasp of, social situations.
Wow. Okay, let's shift to intellect, the thinking part. Darwin looks for what he called practical reasoning. What did that involve?
Simple things, really, like the baby noticing a finger and actively trying to grasp it. That shows a connection, right? Action leads to result.
Cause and effect.
Exactly. And he mentioned something fascinating. Around 4.5 months, the baby repeatedly trying to grab his own reflection in a mirror.
trying to grab the other baby.
Pretty much. Even though there's no self-recognition yet, it shows exploration, curiosity about the world, and, well, himself in a way.
And this leads into imitation, right? Which he saw around 6 or 7 months.
Yes, that intentional copying of actions, another big cognitive leap. And curiosity just seemed to grow interest in sounds around 4 months, and then by about 11 months, actively messing with objects, figuring them out.
Like a little scientist exploring the world.
That's a great way to put it. That hands-on exploration is how infants learn how things work. Darwin even made notes on what might be the very start of a moral sense.
Really? When was that?
Around 13 months, he felt the child started to understand the meaning of naughty, like grasping social rules or expectations.
Quite early. Interesting. And finally, communication.
Yeah.
Language.
Yes, crucial. He tracked those early sounds carefully. He noted the first time mum seemed linked to food, around 11 months, though initially it might have just been a general sound for wanting something.
Not necessarily mom, but I want.
Kind of, yeah. Then came more specific uses like mum, and other little proto-words started appearing.
So you see the progression from just cries to actual intentional sounds with meaning attached.
Absolutely. It's that bridge to language, a monumental step, and Darwin's notes give us a valuable peek into how it starts.
So looking back at Darwin's sketch from 1877, it's just incredible. He maps out this journey in the first year from basic reflexes kicking in almost immediately, through the gradual awakening of senses and emotions, to the first real sparks of intellect and communication.
It really is, and you have to remember, this was just careful observation over a century ago. It provided some of the very first detailed accounts that helped kickstart the whole field of studying how children develop. It's foundational stuff.
Thinking about how much he saw, just by watching closely back in 1877, it really makes you wonder about the incredibly complex and fast development happening inside every baby right from the start. What other really subtle but significant steps might we still be trying to fully understand about those earliest moments of life?